Obsidrugon is one of the most hated Lumions of all time, and the most monochrome. It's almost synonymous with Lumion Legacy's overly defensive metagame, and is one of the most notorious beasts of all time. A slumbering beast, some might say, for its signature move was both thematically unique and disturbingly broken. Does this brokenness carry on into the competitive scene? We will find out as we ask, how good was Obsidrugon actually? I need to get better at saying that. Obsidrugon is an ancient Lumion, not as in it's been around since the dawn of time, but that it was added into the game very early. This early metagame lacked many Lumions that can significantly damage Obsidrugon, with players' options being limited to Eliguana, Zulong, Valkyrie, Luminami, Luxor, Eclipse, and Shotchi. But the problem with Obsidrugon is that with its coverage consisting of Primal Slash, Earthquake, and the occasional Mega Chomp, all the aforementioned Lumions were threatened by Obsidrugon offensively except for Luminami, who in a vacuum is one of Obsidrugon's best counters to this very day. Obsidrugon would get around these threats by pairing with defensive plant types that could handle the light Lumions, while Shotchi was unbelievably frail to the extent that it wasn't difficult to KO with a faster Lumion. And once those were gone, Obsidrugon had the metagame wrapped around his tiny little fingertips. It was an unwavering wall, beating even super effective melee attackers like Seer Knight and Volcaloa. You needed a super effective range attacker to even think about breaking down Obsidrugon, and even then, you needed to safely switch them in against Obsidrugon's plethora of coverage moves. And it would usually use Primal Slash pair with a coverage move of choice, then sharpen to set up against the many Lumions that stonewalled. The last move was Beast Slumber, a near broken move that healed Obsidrugon for a third of its health every turn for the next 3 turns, while boosting its defenses, making it practically impossible to kill without setting up to high levels of damage, and even then Obsidrugon had ways around them. When Rally Ranch was introduced, the metagame became centered around the Trumbull and Mewtune, which was a mixed bag for Obsidrugon. On one hand, Mewtune was an excellent answer to Obsidrugon thanks to its excellent bulk and vicious range power that put Obsidrugon in its place. However, Trumbull was arguably even more broken than Mewtune, and Obsidrugon had the bulk to swallow its attacks. However, those weren't the most important things that Rally Ranch introduced. The most important thing that it introduced would become Obsidrugon's claim to fame, the Resilience ability, which made Obsidrugon truly unwavering. Any attack would increase his defense stat, and Obsidrugon would become unbreakable for even melee setup threats. This would become important for Obsidrugon's career. Resilience boosting melee defense also allowed for very clever Obsidrugon to potentially take on Mewtune, making very clever Obsidrugon fairly reliable. Sephirite City introduced a litany of metal types that had the potential of breaking through Obsidrugon. The new Guard Drone, Stratosaur, an extremely dangerous Protogon, could not only break Obsidrugon but also use Obsidrugon as an opportunity to severely threaten Obsidrugon's team, especially Protogon, who was one of the most dangerous new Lumions, and an Earthquake on the Switch would not make it go away. Stratosaur was incredibly popular, with an Earthquake immunity, as well as the new Guard Bandis, truly bringing Stratosaur into the limelight as the best counter to this terrifying fast wall breaker. And unfortunately, Obsidrugon was caught in this crossfire, with Stratosaur's usage only increasing to counter the many bug types in the game, and being one of Obsidrugon's best counters. Obsidrugon maintained its role as a melee wall, however. Even though Trumbull was no longer king of the hill, Hunter was a new vicious metal type that lacked metal stab, and was utterly annihilated by Earthquake, making Obsidrugon the best counter to Hunter, who was quite popular. Obsidrugon continued to be its usual self as the years went by, with new Lumions being added through various updates such as Fossils, Weather Lumions, and Beach Lumions. However, while Obsidrugon itself maintained its rigid, unwavering nature, its teams began to optimize further and further. Bulky teams were generally popular, and Obsidrugon was the best melee wall in the game, meaning it was the glue holding these teams together. Stratosaur was also on these teams, and actually made an excellent pairing with Obsidrugon by soaking metal and light attacks. Obsidrugon also countered threats to these bulky teams such as Cannibal, and in a 1v1, Joltu, despite being weak to Primal Slash. Over time, very clever Obsidrugon also gained mild attraction, nothing too serious, but it had its moments. When Tundrillum was released in the December of 2021, it introduced the move Body Crash. This move functioned like Body Press from Pokemon, being an average power move that used the Lumion's melee defense stat to do damage. See where this is going? Obsidrugon was not nearly as passive as before, as each time it was hit, Body Crash would become stronger, and stronger, and stronger. This was also its first move that could actually damage Stratosaur for significant damage, though it wouldn't stick due to Perch. This also made Chrysite a viable Lumion, with the drop of Youth item making Body Crash's damage comparable to Obsidrugon. In fact, Obsidrugon and Chrysite began to use Burrow to boost Body Crash themselves over Sharpen sometimes. Unfortunately, that same Tundralin that introduced Body Crash was competition with Obsidrugon thanks to an Icicle Traps immunity, while also having that same Resilience ability and not being weak to Light and Ancient. Obsidrugon was nowhere near outclassed though and was arguably better than Tundralin, and yes, this will remain true throughout Obsidrugon's life. Or Tundralin. Once Atlantean City came around, Obsidrugon finally gained a new option for his moveset. Instead of Sharpen for attack boosting, Obsidrugon would use Drudge to boost its speed and attack. And with this birthed the potential of offensive Obsidrugon. These brawny nimble sets were quite popular when Atlantean City was introduced. However, Obsidrugon slowly returned to his defensive roots due to offensive Drudge not being that great. It was better to use Skellig of all things, as Skellig had actual offensive prowess. Drudge was still used though, just on the bulky sets over Sharpen or Burrow. As time went on, Obsidrugon's teams were more and more optimized, with Venolin, the new Pyrolin, and a buff talent trait setting wars being some of the best partners they could have asked for. When Totap gained Timberflash and became an OU staple, Obsidrugon would stand in its way in spite of Barter and Poison annoying it. When Elephage evolved into Phage Knot, it was a new strong melee wall option, but it couldn't match up to the sheer omnipresence of Obsidrugon, which says a lot due to how good Malware was actually. Eventually, Obsidrugon started receiving complaints. It was deemed too difficult to be KO'd for many teams, and the idea that Lumions such as Borak and Totap were being too easily neutralized, and Obsidrugon began to have a stranglehold on the metagame, especially because it was unbelievably easy to pivot into a range wall like Venolin, Pyrolin, and Stratosaur, while other melee walls were seriously falling out of favor like Ventation. The developers began adding Lumions designed to beat Obsidrugon. Sinoga was the first of these, with Spite as an option as a stall breaker, but its ancient weakness held it back from being a true stall breaker against Obsidrugon. Celestine came around in late 2022, with the Reverberate ability preventing Obsidrugon from beast slumbering when it was on the field. However, it was balanced by being weak to Body Crash, and that as well as Celestine's host of issues prevented it from being a metagame staple or an Obsidrugon counter. For a time, Obsidrugon was suspect tested, and interestingly enough, it was banned to Ubers for some time, putting Obsidrugon on the same level as Mutagon for a time. The developers eventually gave up and threw the hardest counter possible in Charonix, but in turn Charonix began to gain controversy similarly to Obsidrugon, except it was way more versatile. Obsidrugon was unbanned at some point and continued its reign of terror over OU, despite Charonix, thanks to its existing qualities being too valuable to pass up on for semi-stall, hard stall, and balance teams that dominated the metagame. To this very day, Obsidrugon is the same demonic, foreboding wall it always was. Resilience was nerfed to only trigger against a contact move before Obsidrugon was banned, but Obsidrugon's natural bulk meant that it still handled Borak and Barbadger. Obsidrugon was truly synonymous with the Lumion Legacy metagame as one of the all-time greatest walls. And that's it. So how good was Obsidrugon actually? In short, it was excellent throughout its life. Even when its biggest threats came around, it maintained its niche and eventually became so broken it was banned, while the developers were doing everything they could to dethrone it. Despite that, Obsidrugon's innate values made it impossible to fall out of the metagame, and that frankly doesn't look to change anytime soon. Thanks for watching, and let us know how much do you like or hate Obsidrugon, and what Lumion do you want to see us cover in the future? We can cover anything at this point.